Hey, Frankie, we're coming up on our 1 year anniversary of the PSI Effect podcast. And I know we've been talking about doing something special for that big event. I know I'm excited about it when I think about what it took for us to get everything off the ground. But hey, what do you think about that? What should we do?
I mean, it's amazing that it's been that long already. Seems like we just got started and we're almost at the 1 year mark. But I think it would be great if we could incorporate our listeners, people that have been impacted. I'd love to hear from
Ooh,
some
that's
of the
good.
people that's been impacted by the podcast in positive ways, and hear how they've been able to glean some good stuff from the podcast, and maybe even come on and join us as we get ready to celebrate the 50th episode.
That is fantastic. I like that idea. Well, y'all heard it. Frankie's just invited you to come on the podcast and share your experiences that you have had listening to us over the last year. So if you're interested in doing that, just drop us a DM on any of the social platforms where you find us, and we can reach out and see if we can get something set up and get you on this podcast and share with others like yourself and help others to find their way to positive experiences as well.
Yeah. And with that, enjoy the upcoming episode.
Setbacks are temporary, but comebacks, they are legendary. Welcome back to the PSI Effect, where we pause, shift, and ignite purpose that speaks louder than your past. This is Nuge, and together with Frankie, we're your hosts in this space, and your comeback starts now.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the PSI Effect podcast. I am Nuge. I'm here with Frankie, and we are glad to have you with us today. Today we have something really exciting, really special for you, I think. We're going to be talking about the difference between problems and setbacks, and we're going to talk a little bit about strength, and we're going to be talking about the tools that we have in a toolbox to kind of help us with all of that. So kind of looking forward to the discussion today. But as always, before we really jump in, we switch over to Frankie and say, hey, man, what's up?
What's up, Nuge? I'm doing all right, man. Just like I mentioned before we started recording, it's a little hot and humid over here today, but I'll make it through. Yeah, I will make it through. The week that we just had, though, was a really good week for me. And the reason I say that is we're in graduation season. And, I've mentioned on the podcast before about my oldest son and, where he is in his academic journey. Well, since we were last together, he has successfully graduated high school.
Yay. That's awesome. I'm sure he's excited.
He is super excited, and he is also a little scared at the same time, getting ready to going from being a big fish in the high school setting to having to be a little fish in the college setting and find his footing again. That's something that's on his mind. But, he's got a summer job, so he'll be working on that. But one thing that was really awesome, and, you were there, was the graduation party that we had for my son. And it was awesome to pull together groups of people from all the different phases of his life. I think in addition to just family there, one of the things that meant the most to me is that we had the nurse who was his primary care person when he was in the NICU for 6 weeks after he was born. So she was the primary person taking care of him when he was in the neonatal ICU for 6 weeks. And then she was able to join us again to celebrate his graduation from high school. And if that's not a full circle moment, I don't know what is.
Cool as that.
Yeah,
That's very cool.
Yeah. And one of the things that I really hope that he kind of takes away from all this is that he has no matter where he goes, no matter what he does, he's got a strong village of people, blood family, as well as people who have poured into his life, through his journey, that are willing to step up and be there for him. So the strength of the village is the theme that I really want him to carry forward after the celebrations that we had this weekend.
Yeah, we call that extended family.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, people have been around for a long time. They're not blood, but they've been around for a long time, and they are part of that village.
Oh, 100%. And, it kind of reminds me of what we talk about sometimes when we talk about looking for accountability partners. I mean, sometimes those people aren't family. Those are people that are like family, that are close to us. Those are people that are part of our village. Those are people that are part of what makes us strong. And as I was reflecting on that and really being in a state of gratitude about that over the week, that's where I really kind of started thinking about just strengths more generally stated, right? I spoke about how just now the strength of the village was on full display when we were in this celebration. And it made me think about a statement that I came across one time, and it's we think a lot about our strengths, and just as much as our strengths can help us, they can also hurt us if we don't use them with intentionality and purpose. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that that is spot on. And, when I think of strengths, first and foremost, fortunately, we're all strong in different areas, right? So as you mentioned, the village is a collective of different
Uh-huh.
strengths. And so the thing that I like to liken it to, or I think about, is, likening strength to uh, a radio dial or volume switch on your TV, right? And understanding your strengths and knowing when to turn that volume down, to say, a 3 or a 4 on the scale, and knowing when to turn it up. And when you need it on, 10 or 12, you might need to have it on full blast. And just, being able to manage that strength, within in those parameters when the time arises.
Yeah, and that's something that I think we might take for granted sometimes. At least I know I have in the past, where I'll think about areas like, okay, I'm strong in this area. I know how this strength helps me, but I don't give a lot of thought or a lot of reflection on how could this strength potentially hinder me or hurt me if I use it too much or use it in the wrong way. It's really that double-edged sword. Yes, it can help me, but if I'm not careful, it can, and I overuse it, it can be something that hinders or hurts me. And that really makes me think a lot about sports. You think about
Mm.
all these these overuse injuries that we see in sports, the rash of, ruptured and torn Achilles in basketball, baseball pitchers with shoulder issues, elbow issues, having to have Tommy John surgery, football players with knee issues and, getting CTE from lots of collisions, just like those athletes get injured from overuse. I think we run the risk of injury or harming ourselves or hindering ourselves when we overuse some of our strengths.
Yeah, because I don't know, maybe part of it is our innate competitive nature. Even some of us who are not, highly competitive, I think we all have, somewhat of a competitive nature of things. And I think that overuse uh is overlooked, because we're just trying to do the thing, right?
Right.
We're trying to accomplish the goal. And so, uh, eventually if we keep that up, then it can start to, diminish our relationship. It can diminish our sights on the end goal because we're just being focused on that one thing and we're being very competitive about it. And so, yeah, I mean, I think we just have to be careful. Like I said, back to the radio dial, is knowing when to turn it up and knowing when to turn it down, so that we can manage that effectively. Because sometimes the end goal is trying to help somebody else, and if we lose focus, then we really have not done a good job of helping who we're trying to help.
Absolutely. Tools in the toolbox. We can have all the tools in the world, but if we don't know how to use them the right time, the right way, they're not going to give us the outcome that we're hoping for. Just thinking about preparing for this topic brought to mind a quote from Don Clifton. We think about ourselves being well-rounded people. We have a lot of tools in the toolbox and things like that. But Don Clifton was a psychologist, and he made the statement, when we studied them, excellent performers were rarely well-rounded. On the contrary, they were sharp. So you mentioned people being really competitive, those high-performing people that want to be competitive and keep going. So Clifton said, when we studied them, excellent performers were rarely well-rounded. On the contrary, they were sharp. What do you think he meant by that quote?
Well, I think what he meant was, we just can't be really good at everything, right?
Mhm.
Our strengths are focused around a couple of key things that we know, right? Things that we do. We can't really be strong at every single thing, which goes back to the village, right? We all have certain strengths that really make up the collective, and so I think that's what he meant is that we just can't be good at everything. And quite honestly, when you try to do that, you just don't do a good job. If you're trying to be exceptional at everything, and I think the route to take is probably to identify with, the 2 or 3 things that you're really good at, and maybe that's one thing that you're really good at and, become exceptional there and hone that particular skill, right? Make that your number 1, uh, go-to in your toolbox because that's what you're really good at. And
Right.
then, just be aware of your weaknesses, and understand how those can impact the strength that you have when you're trying to achieve your goal.
Yeah, I mean, as we're navigating our problems and our setbacks and just life generally speaking, it's exactly like you said. We have these T-shaped skill sets. I think we may have mentioned it in a previous conversation, the notion of T-shaped skill sets, where we have, a breadth of knowledge across a lot of different topics. But then, we've got that T that gives us the depth of knowledge in one or two specific things. And, what Clifton is saying, at least the way I'm interpreting it, just, when Clifton is saying is that those two or three specific things where you have depth of knowledge, that's really where you butter your bread, for lack of a better
Mhm.
term, to be able to solve the problems, deal with setbacks, and move yourself forward. Yeah, I like how you put that, though. We can't be great at everything. Some people try, and, bless them for trying, but we can't be great at everything.
Well, sometimes in our own mind, we're Superman, right? In our
Yeah.
own mind. Uh, but, again, we just have to manage that because even Superman had, kryptonite. So
Hmm.
we have to be aware of that. So in that idea of being well-rounded, we were talking about how we can lose sight of our weaknesses, right? So does that give us an excuse to just say, to heck with the weaknesses?
I wouldn't necessarily say to heck with the weaknesses, but I would say there is more value in understanding how our strengths can both help and hinder us than it is investing a lot of time in trying to turn weaknesses into strengths. Because a lot of times you think about it, when somebody identifies a weakness, I know I used to be this way too. I would identify a weakness, like, okay, I'm going to focus, I'm going to put in this work, and I'm going to try to turn this weakness into a strength. And you can make progress. It could be, effortful, take a lot of, dedication and intentionality, and you can make progress. But rarely will I be able to turn something where I'm very weak into something that's one of my top strengths. I can
Mm,
improve it, but it'll be rare for me to put it on the top shelf, so to speak. So in that regard, yes, acknowledge your weaknesses, but focus more on understanding the proper time and place to deploy your strengths.
absolutely. All right. Well, with that, let's get into the whole problem versus setback conversation. So, we talk about setbacks, we talk about problems. What's the difference?
We mentioned navigating setbacks and problems, and that's sometimes we use those words interchangeably, but I think there is a significant distinction between the two. A problem is something that you can deal with and not have it affect your forward progress. So it's an obstacle that you have to navigate. It's something that can be fixed before it starts to impede your progress or slow your momentum. And it gives you an opportunity to fix things. That's what problems are. Problems are about fixing things. So problems are things that can just be in our way, but if we see them soon enough, they don't turn into setbacks. And that's kind of how I think
Mhm.
those things are related. We have problems, and if we don't deal with problems in the right way or soon enough or something like that, the problems then turn into setbacks.
Yeah, and those setbacks really kind of slow your momentum
Mhm.
toward your end goal, right? Um, And so, I think that that's when the pause really becomes important so that you can really understand what you're actually dealing with. Are you dealing with a problem or are you dealing with a setback? And which way do you go, or what skills or what tools do you need to navigate through, whether it's a problem or a setback?
Yeah, and this is where I channel my inner child and thinking about some of the '80s TV that I was raised by, and two shows in particular: MacGyver back in the '80s and the A Team back in the '80s. For our listeners, if you don't know who those shows, it's worth a Google search just so you know. And if you don't know that, it's also just know that it's made me feel really old that you don't know who MacGyver and the A Team are. So just understand that, listeners. But the thing about both of those shows is that a recurring theme is that either MacGyver or the A-Team folks would get into trouble, something would happen, and they would find themselves trapped somewhere. And it was like clockwork every show. They had to take inventory of what was in the space and then use whatever they had at their disposal to be able to find a solution. For MacGyver, it's like, all right, I got my Swiss Army knife, some bubble gum, a piece of foil, and a paper clip, and he would use that to make a rocket to escape. The A-Team would find something, and inevitably there would always be a welder and some blowtorches, and they would fabricate something to get out of a problem. But that's essentially what we're doing when we encounter something, determine is it a problem or a setback, and then take inventory of what tools are in our toolbox, what strengths do we have at our disposal to help us navigate those.
So basically, what you're saying is that in those situations, you have to determine if you are a fixer, right? A problem,
Mm-hmm.
fix the problem, or if you're an adapter, right, to the setback. So you have to, maybe change direction in order to reach a solution to what's facing you.
Fixer versus adapter. Yeah, I like that. That kind of encapsulates the theme of it very nicely.
I like the whole MacGyver thing because I remember that, and I think our audience might, there's a newer version of MacGyver which I think is quite different than the original. So
We shall not
when
speak
you
of
do your
this.
search,
We
what's
shall
that?
not speak of the new. We shall not speak of the new MacGyver.
Yeah,
80s MacGyver with Richard Dean Anderson.
when you search, make sure you get the original because that is the one that I know that Frankie is talking about.
Oh yeah, you can't beat 80s
Um,
TV though.
right. 80s TV, Lord have mercy.
Mhm.
All right. So continuing on. So we talk a little bit about problems, and we talked about setbacks, and so let's talk about some of these tools that we have. When we think about somebody or someone who's really exceptional, we think about that person as being a hammer, right? Or that tool that they have is a hammer moving through. And so, um, you know, when you think about your strengths, you can't necessarily use the same strength throughout the entire process of what you're trying to do, right? To reach the
Right.
goal that you want to reach. And so, if you think about building a house, you can't build an entire house with just a hammer. I suppose you could try, but
I was about to say you could, but you have to think about how much longer and how much more arduous the build process would be. Like if I said, yes, I am a hammer master. I am the MC Hammer of house building, and that's my best strength is using a hammer. I could try to use a hammer to build a house, but there are going to be outcomes like, okay, what about when I need to cut wood? I'm just going to be able to bust it apart with the hammer. Or if I need to connect pipes, maybe I can bang them together. So I could
that is going to be an
try.
odd looking house, man.
Tell me about it. So, we could use that strength, but the outcome is going to suffer because of it.
Yeah. And so that just takes us back to, making sure that we are keenly aware of what our strengths are, right? And
Mhm.
what strengths help us and what strengths that can actually hurt us. And you mentioned it earlier, like we don't really think about those strengths that hinder us. They're on the outside of what our strengths are. They're just kind of like in the back of our mind somewhere, hidden away. And I think that the weaknesses are that come out, or how our strengths hinder us sometimes, may be because of, fear or maybe unforeseen circumstances. We're trying to navigate kind of quickly with our strength, but we haven't taken enough time to, do that pause or that inventory of the situation. And I think that sometimes that strength can hinder us in that way. Or, if you're in a situation, let's say, let's just say you're a fixer, right? You want to fix
Hmm.
everything. And, you're at home and your partner comes in and your partner has a problem and want to, just start giving you some conversation about what happened in your day and,
Hmm.
where you should be showing empathy in that situation, right? You're actually trying to be a fixer. You're trying to solve the problem and you're giving your partner solutions or things that they should do. And then your partner is just like, why did I start trying to share this with you anyway?
You been talking to my wife, Nuge?
I do talk to her.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's 100% true. It's 100% true. If a lot of times we go with what we know. We go, we
Mm,
talk about comfort a lot, and I'm going to make another reference that kind of shows my age. Um, the show I Love Lucy from
mm,
back in the day. So if you watch like TV Land and some of those, you might see some I Love Lucy. But there was an episode, and I remember this. There was an episode where the main character, Lucy lost a pair of earrings. And when her
mm.
husband came home, she was out in the living room, like looking through the shag carpet, trying to find the lost earrings. And the husband said, "Hey, what are you doing?" She said, "I lost my earrings in the bedroom." And he said, "Well, if you lost them in the bedroom, why are you looking for them in here in the living room?" And she said, "Oh, the light's better out here." Right. So for a lot of times, the light is better with certain strengths, but applying those strengths to solve the problem isn't necessarily going to give us the solution that we need.
Man, that is so right. That is so right. And that, again, that just takes me back to the pause and understanding whether you're dealing with, a problem or a setback or whatever the
Mhm.
situation is, because you can really go off the rails if you don't take that time to identify what tools you actually need. And I know we talk about building houses and, this can transfer into your work and your in working, man, tongue tied there. This can translate into your working environment,
There we go.
leadership, management, and so forth. And I think it's probably even more evident because you have so many different personalities that you're dealing with sometimes, depending on the size and scope of your position. So that identification of what tools you need at the time, and sometimes that situation is fast moving, and so you
Right.
have to make that decision, as they say, on a dime.
Yeah. Knowing the right tool is pivotal. Also, like we always say, knowing the side effect of that tool is important. That's that whole help hinder thing like we were talking about. And just another analogy I'll give before we move on is the like prescription medications.
Mm,
It's amazing to me how we see so many commercials nowadays where there are advertisements for prescription medications and it talks about all the things that it'll do to help you out. And then really quickly at the end, they start talking super fast and they tell you about all the potential side effects of, said prescription message. Like, oh yes, you'll have stomach cramps. You'll have excessive flatulence with oily discharge. All of this other stuff. And sometimes I'm like, man, I think I might just rather have whatever it was that was ailing me than dealing with all the side effects of that
agreed.
medicine. Excessive
Ag-
flatulence with oily discharge? No, thank you.
Agreed, man. Agreed. I mean, you hear that all the time, and I know that a lot of times we just want relief,
Hmm.
but the consequence of that relief sometimes can be as you described, which no, thank you. I'm with you on that.
For sure.
So let's talk about strength, and what that actually means. What's your definition of strength?
Well, that definition has changed in my mind over time because I used to think, strength was about, okay, I can lift this, I can move this, I can endure that. But as I've gotten older and as I've seen more, more winters have settled upon my chin here with this white hair and this beard, I've realized that strength is not a physical attribute. It's not. And I think it gets misconstrued as such. Real strength is something that, especially when we're talking about using our strengths to solve a problem, it is the ability to, kind of consistently deliver a near perfect performance in the execution of a task or in the solving of a problem. That's kind of where I land with.
You use the word consistently.
Mhm.
And, such a reoccurring word in our episodes is being consistent in practices on this journey of, between setback and comeback. And, I mean, I agree with your definition. And I think just the consistent practice of, your performance in an area is really what strength is. Sure, you can be strong, but, I think strength is more mental, than it is physical.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we kind of get to this part of the conversation, I think this is a good spot for us to kind of have a conversation around our strengths, talk about how we think they help us, and then also look at that flip side, that double-edged sword of how we think they might hinder us as well. And I think this will allow us to kind of package this up in a way that our listeners can kind of take it and run with it and do this same activity in their spaces.
Well, I think that's a cool idea. And I think, strengths, come in different shapes and sizes, right? And, I was thinking through, what are my strengths or what are some of my strengths? And, I jotted down a few, um, and just thinking back over time, one of the things that came to mind when I was in the workplace, I would have my teammates would come and say, "Nude, you notice everything."
Eagle
And
eye.
so, I thought, one of my strengths is attention to detail, right? And, being able to identify those things.
Okay.
And, and part of that is, as you mentioned, eagle eye, having that attention to detail. Sometimes you just kind of overlook what, other people may, feel about a situation or what have you. You just, trying to get to the end goal and you're trying to make sure everything is just so. And I think that sometimes that is, can be perceived as micromanagement, right?
Mhm.
Which out of that, I think, folks will say, yeah, I know you were in the military, right? So,
Mm.
that kind of goes hand in hand and being able to manage that. But I think part of the thing for me in that whole attention to detail is, some of the expectations that are placed upon you. And if you're in a leadership role, you have to own situations. You have to own processes, which is another strength that I laid out here is that, ownership, because that's one thing that I did do was I owned whatever I was responsible for, whether it turned out well or it turned out not well, I still had to own it because it was my responsibility. And so, I talked a little bit about attention to detail and how that can be a hindrance because people can perceive you to be a micromanager, and in your own mind, that's not really what you're trying to do, but perhaps you just haven't communicated, that properly. And I will say, in my defense, that, by the time I left certain places, that some of the staff were a bit more observant of the details than they were when I got there. And then, with ownership, you get to a point sometimes where you just can't let go of things, and you have people around you who again, feel like you're micromanaging, that you don't care about their input and so forth. And so I had to get to a point where, and it took some time for me to learn this, but I had to get to a point where I was comfortable surrounding myself with people who were better than me at certain things or smarter than me,
Mhm.
because, you have to realize that you can't do it all, right? As that saying goes, no man is an island. You can't survive all by yourself. As much as you want to own it, as much as you want to be responsible, you have to let it go. And so, surrounding yourself with people who are smarter than you or better than you at some processes, a couple of things come out of that. One, other people begin to take ownership because they're showing off their wares. They're doing what they're good at, and then you become smarter.
Mhm.
So, um, so anyway, so those were a couple of things that I was thinking about as we were as I was looking at my inventory of strengths and how they could hinder me.
Yeah. And I think you did an awesome job of enumerating, both sides of the coin, both edges of that sword, so to speak, for those things. Responsibility and ownership is one of mine too. So I won't get into that one because the same sort of thing that you described applies for me there. One of the ones that's kind of near the top for me is, I'm kind of an achiever. I won't say an overachiever, but being an achiever, I have lots of stamina when it comes to getting the work done. I can work at an intense pace for an extended duration. I'm motivated by getting things done. Um, and just really trying to get things over the finish line. But the flip side of that can come to haunt me, the hinder side of that strength is, sometimes it causes me to overcommit to in the idea of wanting to get it all done. I commit to too much. Sometimes it can mean that I'm focusing too much on the output rather than the outcome. And those are
Mm.
two very different things. And then sometimes it manifests negatively. I'm trying to work at a pace that my team or the people around me can't sustain the same way I can. And then it feels like I'm pulling and prodding people along, and it's not, I'm not being a good leader. So, being an achiever, those are the help and the hinders for that one for me. The other one that I'll talk about is, I like to I'm adept at trying to bring order to chaos, trying to find processes, make changes, arrange things in the most efficient way possible, really focus on continuous improvement. So I'm an arranger, for lack of a better term. I like to see things get better, and I'm not afraid to jump into complicated situations to try to, um, you know, change things around, move things around to make a better output or outcome. So
So
the flip side, what were you about to say, Nate? I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, so in some respects, I mean, you're a fixer in that analogy that you just mentioned, right? Because you want to make things better.
Mhm.
That's part of what fixers want to do.
Sure. Yeah, I'll agree with that. Absolutely. I want to see the best outcome possible. But in that, the other edge of the sword, the hinder side of the equation, sometimes it can be interpreted as wanting to change things just for the sake of change.
Mm,
Sometimes it can be seen as something's never good enough, so you got to keep tinkering.
mhm.
So those are the ways that I have to be careful with with that arranger trait that I have, just to make sure that I don't overuse it and come across that way.
Yeah, and I think that's a fine line too, because that arranger piece and wanting the best outcome, in this day and age where competition is strong in a lot of areas, you definitely want to be on top of that, make sure that you are competitive in your specific marketplace. So competition is really stiff these days. But
Mm.
I want to, not that it hasn't always been stiff, but I think it's just different now. And maybe it's because you're talking about age, and I think back years, and I think to today, it just seems different. But
Mhm.
I do want to point out, you're talking about the achiever in you, and you said you weren't an overachiever. And for some of our listeners who have been with us from the beginning, I just want to recall the conversation we had about your Christmas list and how you put that together. I think that would be considered overachievement, sir.
No, that was just an arranger. There's lots of things inside of that catalog that I could want. So I wanted to arrange them in the most readable way possible to convey my ideas.
Got you. Got you. Okay. So, now that we've gone through this, I want to challenge our audience to take an inventory of what your strengths and your weaknesses are, and identify how you believe that your strengths can be a hindrance to you if applied um, in the wrong situations or applied in too heavy of a dose. I mean, go back to the radio dial analogy. Knowing when to turn the volume down and knowing when to turn the volume up based on the situation. And so, I just want to challenge the audience to make that inventory and see where they land. And you know maybe you might need to get some help. I mean, what do you think, Frankie?
Yeah. So, that question may come up. It's like, all right, that's easy to say, Nuge, but how do I identify my strengths? There's a lot of ways we can go about it. One, I mean, there are assessments out there that you can take that kind of help you find those things out. But one of the easiest ways that I found is just to take some time, sit down and write out a list of words that you would use to describe yourself. And then reach out to somebody you know and trust, an accountability partner, family member, what have you, and ask them to do the same thing, to write down a list of words that they would use to describe you. The more input you can get, the better. And then take a look at those lists and try to look for similarities. See if there are common themes that present themselves as you look at those two lists. And if there are commonalities, guess what? Those are probably your strengths.
That's a good exercise, I think, because I think about how many people who are listening right now who don't really talk about themselves, or don't like to talk about themselves, right? And don't really want to identify with, some of their positive attributes. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that we should have, we should feel good about that, right? Because those are things that make up who we are. And I think that type of inventory lets us know how we, can improve on some of those things that we don't feel so good about on our list, and how we can celebrate those things that, that make us really excited that are on that list. And especially if you carry the exercise forward as you described, and have an accountability partner or somebody that we know and love and trust to make a list, and those lists are somewhat compatible. Those are things that we can celebrate. And I also want to mention, this is something that we haven't said in a long time, Frankie, is that, we are not professional therapists or, anything like that. We're just talking about our own life experiences, how we arrive at some of the things that we come up with here. So I just want to put that out there. And, each one of these situations is going to be unique to the person who is going through the exercise, but do go through it. I think you might be pleasantly surprised at some of what you find out about yourself.
Yeah. And also too, as you go through it, think about the interactions of the things that you're going to talk. You're going to look at how the strengths help you. You're going to think about how the strengths could also hinder you, but you should also consider, how do your strengths interact with one another? Prime example, right? I talked about being an achiever, and then I talked about, I felt like I had a high level of ownership and responsibility. The thing I have to watch out for those two being in my top strengths is that the achiever in me wants to get everything done, and the responsibility, wanting to take ownership of everything, means sometimes I try to take ownership or responsibility for things that I shouldn't. Right? So think about how those strengths can interact with one another well as you're evaluating this challenge.
Absolutely. Perfectly put, sir. Well, I think that this has been a very enlightening conversation. Hopefully our audience, our audience, have taken some golden nuggets away from this conversation today. And as usual, before we end our conversation, Frankie, would you please let our audience know where they can find us and listen in?
Sir, yes, sir. So for all things PSI Effect podcast related, go to our website. This is psipod.com. There you'll find all of our episodes, all the different platforms where you can subscribe to the audio form of our podcast. So Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, all the podcast platforms. Make sure you subscribe today if you haven't already, so you don't miss any episodes. Also, we do full video of our episodes. You can catch us on YouTube by searching for the PSI Effect podcast, or using our handle at This Is PSI Pod, which is also our handle in the social media spaces for TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. You can find us out there at This Is PSI Pod. Give us a shout.
Perfect. And before we leave, I do want to, I meant to do this at the top of the hour. I want to go ahead and give a really good shout out to our friends and family over at Bethsaida Baptist Church over there, where we celebrated the graduation and had Sunday service with a good message from Pastor Myers over there. So I just want to give the folks over there a good shout out. They're always welcoming and friendly and engaging, and it was just a really good time spent together, fellowship with the folks there. So just want to give them that shout out, just to let them know that we're thinking about them. We appreciate your support.
Yes,
And
yes.
as we go through the week, I just want to make sure that everybody remembers that setbacks are temporary and comebacks are indeed legendary. And until next time, go out there and be brave and rise on purpose.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the PSI Effect podcast. This show doesn't happen without you, and you can connect with us via Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. Visit our website at thisispsipod.com and find us on YouTube and social media at This Is PSI Pod. That's at This Is PSI Pod. Until next time, remember, be brave and rise on purpose.